I've been giving a lot of thought to what it takes to get a business to that next level. Like, how do you really grow?
Hmm.
And for a lot of companies, that means looking at new markets.
Yeah,
And one that seems to be on everyone's mind lately is India.
of course. Yeah.
It's such a huge market with so much potential, but then you start thinking about international hiring and, oh my gosh, all the regulations.
Yeah, it can be a lot to think about.
Yeah, it can feel impossible.
Right.
And so today we wanted to look at a smarter way to approach this, and specifically how a company like INS Global can really simplify expanding a business into India.
Okay.
And we're going to focus on their PEO and EOR services, their professional employer organization, and their employer of record services in India.
Got it.
So think of it as a way to get into the Indian market quickly and easily without getting lost in all the red tape.
That sounds great. I mean, have you ever thought about India as a market,
Oh, yeah.
but been totally overwhelmed by the idea of setting everything up? Yeah, if that sounds familiar, then what we're talking about today could be a real game changer.
So let's dive into how it works. What exactly is a PEO and an EOR in India? Because INS Global offers both.
Right.
What's the difference between them?
Well, in the Indian context, a PEO basically acts as your outsourced HR department.
Okay.
They take care of things like payroll, benefits, and all those administrative tasks that could be a real pain in a new country.
Sure.
Now, an EOR takes it a step further because with an EOR like INS Global, they actually become the legal employer of your team in India.
Oh, so they actually employ the people in India.
Yeah,
So they handle all the legal things that come with being an employer.
exactly. They take care of all the legal stuff, making sure you're compliant with all the local labor laws.
Got it.
And the PEO services handle the day-to-day HR functions.
Okay. And INS Global does both.
Yep, they provide both.
Right.
A comprehensive solution.
So for anyone who's thinking about expanding into India, why would they go with a PEO or EOR like INS Global instead of setting up your own company in India?
I think one of the biggest advantages is speed. INS Global can have you up and running super quickly. I mean, you could be hiring and transferring employees within 48 hours,
Wow.
which is a huge difference compared to setting up a legal entity in India.
Yeah, how long does that normally take?
You're looking at maybe 6 months.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Especially if you're a business that needs to move quickly.
Absolutely.
And what about the cost? I mean, setting up a whole new company sounds expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And it's another area where the PEO or EOR model really shines.
Okay.
It can be significantly cheaper. I'm talking up to 80% less expensive than going through the full incorporation process.
80%.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, you're saving on legal fees, administrative overhead, all that adds up. On average, you could be saving around $450 just on those administrative fees alone.
Okay, so less money, less time. What about risk? I mean, anytime you move into a new market, there's some risk involved.
Right. And that's where INS Global's local expertise is super valuable.
Okay.
They understand the Indian laws and regulations. So by partnering with them, you're really reducing the risk of making those costly mistakes or getting into legal trouble.
So less risk, less money, less time. They seem to have it all covered. But it sounds like INS Global does more than just the initial setup.
Yeah.
What about all those ongoing HR tasks? You know, the ones that come with having employees.
Right. They handle a lot of those crucial but really time-consuming HR processes,
Okay.
especially the ones that can get really complicated if you're not familiar with how things work locally.
Like what?
Well, things like managing payroll, which is surprisingly complex in India.
Okay.
They also do recruitment, so they can help you find the best talent and even manage relationships with independent contractors if you need that.
So it really frees you up to focus on growing your business.
Exactly.
That makes sense. And I imagine this approach is probably good for the employees, too.
Yeah. I mean, companies that use PEO services see a reduction in employee turnover
Really?
by about 14% on average.
Wow, that's a lot. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think employees feel more secure knowing that their payroll is taken care of, that they have benefits,
Yeah.
that they're employed through a reputable organization like INS Global.
Yeah.
I mean, they know what they're doing. They know the local employment laws and the norms.
14% is a big difference.
It is.
It shows that it's not just good for the company, it's good for the employees, too.
Right.
And what about the companies that have used this approach? Are they happy with it?
Yeah. I mean, the satisfaction rates are really high. Like 98% of current PEO clients would recommend it.
98%. That's almost everyone.
Almost everyone.
That's really impressive.
It is. It really shows that it works.
And I read something interesting about how these companies weathered the storm during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, businesses using a PEO or EOR model saw way fewer closures during the pandemic, something like 58% less compared to companies that went through traditional incorporation.
Wow.
Which I think really shows how much more agile they are and how much a good PEO or EOR can really support you when things get tough.
Yeah, it speaks to the stability of the model.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what a PEO and EOR are and why you might use them.
Right.
So let's get into the details of what businesses need to know about HR in India and how INS Global helps. And let's start with compliance with local laws. Indian labor law has a reputation for being pretty complicated.
It is, yeah. Indian labor law is a complex web of national and state level regulations.
And that can be a problem for companies that aren't familiar with them.
Yeah, that's where INS Global's expertise comes in.
Right.
They know how to navigate those regulations and make sure that everything is done by the book.
So from employment contracts to terminations, they make sure you're following all the laws.
Exactly.
I read that employment contracts are especially important in India. What are some of the key things to keep in mind when you're putting those together?
Well, a clear and well-written contract is essential.
Okay.
And something that's super important is that any offer letter or employment contract has to state the salary in Indian rupees.
Not in dollars or euros.
No, it has to be in rupees. It's a legal requirement.
Okay.
And even though a written contract isn't always strictly legally required, it's definitely the best practice.
Makes sense.
It makes everything clear, like what the compensation is, what the benefits are, what happens if someone is terminated.
So it avoids any confusion down the line.
Exactly.
And what about fixed-term contracts? Are those common in India?
Yeah, they're allowed.
Yeah.
Especially if you're hiring someone for a specific project.
Okay.
Or for a shorter time period.
Got it.
And it's also pretty common to have a probation period when you hire someone new.
How long is that usually?
Usually up to 6 months.
Okay.
During that time, the employer has a bit more flexibility if it's not working out.
Makes sense.
But all of that should be clearly stated in the contract.
Okay. Good to know. What about working hours? What's a typical work week in India?
A standard work week is around 40 hours.
Okay.
Usually an 8-hour workday. And employees are legally entitled to at least one day off every week.
Okay.
And there have to be at least 10.5 hours of rest time between workdays.
And what about overtime? What happens if someone works more than 40 hours?
That's considered overtime.
Okay.
And they're usually paid time and a half for those extra hours.
So pretty standard then. All right, let's move on to maternity leave. What are the rules around that in India?
Well, India actually has really good maternity leave benefits.
Oh, okay.
Women who've worked for at least 80 days with the same employer can get a full 26 weeks of paid leave.
26 weeks. That's great.
It is. But it drops to 12 weeks if a woman already has 2 or more children.
Okay.
And 8 weeks of that leave can be taken before the due date.
That's good to know.
There's also provisions for additional paid leave if there's a miscarriage. And women can't be fired because they're pregnant, and their employment terms can't be changed to their disadvantage while they're on leave.
That's really good.
Yeah.
It's important.
What about paternity leave? Is there anything like that in India?
Not at the national level.
Okay, let's talk about taxes.
Yeah.
It's not the most exciting topic, but it's important. How do taxes work for companies and individuals in India?
Well, both domestic and foreign companies are taxed in India.
Okay.
But while domestic companies are taxed on their worldwide income, foreign companies are only taxed on the income they earn within India.
Okay.
For individuals, the tax system can be pretty complex.
I bet.
You have national and state level taxes and direct and indirect taxes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it can get complicated.
And the rates?
It depends on the income bracket, but they can range from about 5% up to 30%.
And who's responsible for setting up those tax deductions?
That usually falls on the employer.
And that's where INS Global comes in.
Exactly. They can handle all the tax deductions.
Which makes life a lot easier. So much easier. Trust me.
What about employee benefits? What are the mandatory benefits that companies have to provide in India?
There's quite a few. Health insurance, life insurance, provident funds.
So it's a provident fund.
It's basically a retirement savings plan.
Okay.
They also have gratuities, which is a lump sum payment for employees who have worked there for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
And then there's paid time off, employee support programs, and often performance-based bonuses.
So INS Global makes sure that all the employees they hire get those benefits.
Exactly.
And I guess sometimes they go above and beyond the minimum requirement.
They can, yeah, especially if they're trying to attract really good talent.
That's smart. Now, what about hiring independent contractors in India?
That's pretty common. They usually work as self-employed professionals or they have their own small businesses.
Okay.
And their work is governed by a work agreement, not an employment contract.
And INS Global can help with that?
Yeah, they can make sure that all the paperwork and the compliance is done correctly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about payroll. I've heard that payroll in India is really complicated.
Oh, it is. And that's mostly because of all the additions and deductions that have to be calculated.
What kind of deductions?
Well, income tax, benefits, contributions, allowances, things like that.
Got it.
And payroll's usually done monthly.
And INS Global handles all of that.
Yep. They make sure everyone gets paid on time.
Oh, good.
And they provide pay slips with all the deductions broken down.
Which makes things a lot easier for the company. What about minimum wage in India? Is there a national minimum wage?
No, there isn't. It's determined by either collective bargaining agreements between employers and unions or by the state governments.
So it varies by location.
It does.
And I imagine INS Global knows all about those local variations.
They do. And they make sure that you're always in compliance with the minimum wage laws in the location where your employees are based.
Now, if you want to bring in talent from outside of India, what are the visa options like?
Well, there are a lot of good options for both work and business purposes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And many of them allow people to stay for up to 5 years.
Okay.
The most common visas for employment are, well, employment visas.
And they're for skilled workers.
Yes.
And they can be extended.
Usually, yes.
Okay, what else?
There are also business visas
For what kind of work?
for specific limited work activities.
Okay.
And they're also usually valid for up to 5 years. And for certain sectors, like power and steel, there's a project visa.
And how long is that good for?
It's usually tied to the length of a specific contract.
And can INS Global help with all that?
Yeah, they can. They can help you navigate those visa requirements and make it a much smoother process.
That's really helpful. So we've talked about taxes for employees, but what about employers? What taxes and responsibilities do they have in India?
Well, they have to manage and pay payroll taxes for their employees.
Right.
They also have to make contributions to things like the Provident Fund,
Okay.
which is usually about 12% of the employee's salary. There are some exemptions for international workers,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's something to keep in mind.
And INS Global takes care of that too.
Yeah, they make sure everything is paid correctly and on time.
So what happens if you need to change an employee's contract? Can you do that easily in India?
You can, but it requires the employee's written consent.
Okay.
And sometimes you need to get agreement from the union if there is one.
And INS Global helps make sure those changes are legal.
They do. So everyone's protected.
Let's touch on healthcare. What's the healthcare system like in India?
They have a public healthcare system,
Right.
but the quality can vary quite a bit depending on where you are.
So what do companies usually do,
A lot of them offer private healthcare plans.
especially if they have international employees?
Exactly.
And INS Global helps with that too.
They can help you set those up.
Okay, good to know. So what happens if an employee leaves the company? What are the rules around termination and severance?
Well, the notice period is usually between 1 and 3 months. And severance pay is generally at least 15 days of average pay for each year of service after the first year.
Okay.
But if there are mass layoffs, the compensation might be higher.
How much higher?
Could be up to 3 months' wages.
And what about gratuity?
If an employee has worked for more than 5 years, they're usually eligible for a gratuity payment.
Okay.
And INS Global handles all of
Yes,
that.
they make sure it's all done legally and correctly.
Yep.
So who makes sure all the labor laws in India are enforced?
It's a bit complicated because the laws are created and enforced at both the national and state level.
Okay.
The Ministry of Labor and Employment provides guidance, but each state has its own regulatory bodies.
And INS Global stays on top of all that.
They have to. It's their job.
What about public holidays? How many are there in India?
There are 3 national holidays that are paid,
Okay.
and then individual states have their own holidays, which could be paid or unpaid.
So it varies from state to state?
Yep.
If you're using INS Global's PEO services, do you need to set up a physical office in India?
No, that's one of the great things about using a PEO.
Okay.
You don't need your own office.
So you save money on rent.
Exactly. You can offer employees the option of working from a co-working space or remotely.
Which is becoming more and more common anyway.
It is.
And INS Global can help you hire both Indian citizens and foreigners.
Yeah, they can. And they make sure that everyone is compliant with the visa and work permit requirements.
So they take care of everything.
They do.
We've covered a lot of information today. So who do you think benefits the most from using an EOR or PEO like INS Global when they're expanding into India?
It's really for any business of any size that wants a simple, efficient, and compliant way to hire people in India.
Okay.
It's especially useful for businesses that don't have an entity in India yet,
Makes sense.
or for those that just don't want to deal with setting up a whole HR infrastructure.
Right.
They're focused on growing their business. They
Yeah.
don't want to get bogged down in HR.
So if you need help finding the right people, does INS Global offer recruitment services?
They do.
And they know the Indian market,
They do. They have a really good understanding of the local business environment.
and they can help you find people anywhere in India.
Yes.
Okay. And what about scaling your workforce? Can you easily add more employees as your business grows?
Yes. You can hire as many or as few as you need.
So you have a lot of flexibility.
Exactly.
And finally, what about the cost of hiring in India? What are the main things that companies need to consider?
Well, obviously the salary,
Of course.
but also recruitment fees, signing bonuses, incentive plans, taxes, social insurance contributions, things like that.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah, there is. But INS Global lays it all out for you. They're very transparent.
So you know what you're getting into.
Exactly.
We've talked about a lot today about expanding into India and how INS Global can really make it a lot easier,
Yeah, it's all about moving quickly,
saving money,
minimizing risk.
and being able to focus on what you do best,
Right.
growing your business. So if you're thinking about India, reach out to INS Global today and tell them about your expansion project. Don't let the thought of regulations and hiring and everything else hold you back.
INS Global can guide you every step of the way. They can make sure you're compliant, that you're hiring the right people, that you're paying them correctly.
Exactly. It can be overwhelming to think about all the details, but INS Global takes care of it all. They're the experts. Contact them today. Tell them about your plans.
India has so much potential for businesses that are willing to take the leap. Don't be afraid to reach out and get the information you need.
The potential in India is incredible. What's going to be your first step towards unlocking it?
Think about it.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.